The word was simple. 1 syllable. 3 letters. Yes. Grace Kelly spoke it into the telephone on a December evening in 1955. On the other end of the line, Prince Rainier III of Monaco waited for her answer. Behind her, in her parents' Philadelphia mansion, her father stood with his arms crossed. He'd already written the check. $2 million, the dowry. Grace looked at the diamond ring Rainier had sent ahead. She thought of Hollywood, the arc lights, the film sets, Hitchcock's next script waiting on her desk. She thought of the Oscar she'd won 8 months earlier. Yes, she said again. 26 years later, on a winding road above Monaco, Grace Kelly would make her final attempt to escape. The car would leave the road at 9:45 a.m. Her daughter Stephanie would survive. Grace would not. The fairy tale had always been a prison. And the most beautiful woman in the world had been trying to escape for 26 years. To understand how a princess dies trying to escape her own kingdom, you need to go back to the beginning. May 1955, Cannes Film Festival. Grace Kelly was 25, at the absolute peak of her career. Fresh Oscar winner, Hollywood's most sought-after actress. The photo opportunity at Monaco's Palace was supposed to be 5 minutes. Shake hands, smile for cameras. Prince Rainier III was 31, handsome in a severe way, with dark eyes that missed nothing. His principality was running out of money. He needed an heir. But more than that, he needed a symbol. When Grace stepped from the car in her black and white floral dress, white gloves, perfect, Rainier saw exactly what he needed. Not just beautiful, untouchable, cool, elegant. The Ice Princess. He wanted to own that ice. The photo session lasted 12 minutes. They barely spoke. But Rainier's eyes never left her face. And Grace, who'd spent her entire life trying to please cold, demanding men, starting with her father, felt something shift. Not love, recognition. Here was a man who looked at her with approval, with the promise that if she was perfect enough, she would finally be worthy. Grace Kelly had no idea she was looking at her future prison warden. 6 months later, Rainier flew to America. He proposed on the 3rd day, alone in the Kelly family's sunroom. "I need a wife," Rainier said. "Not, I love you. Not, I can't live without you. I need a wife. Monaco needs a princess. I think you're perfect for the role." The role? "What about my career?" Grace asked. "You'll have a new career. As Princess of Monaco. As my wife. As the mother of my children." "And acting?" "That life is over." Silence filled the room. Somewhere in Hollywood, 3,000 miles away, Alfred Hitchcock was waiting for her to return. Grace thought about her father, who'd never once said he was proud of her, who was, at this very moment, writing a check for $2 million to buy her a prince. She thought about Gary Cooper, the married man she'd loved at 23, who'd refused to leave his wife. About Hollywood, which loved her beauty but feared her ambition. Rainier was offering something different. Permanence, a title, respect. All she had to do was stop being herself. "Yes," Grace Kelly said. The cage door closed so softly, she barely heard it. The wedding took place on April 19th, 1956. 30 million people watched on television. At 26 years old, Grace Kelly became Her Serene Highness Princess Grace of Monaco. The photographers captured her smile, the elegance, the fairy tale perfection. They didn't capture the moment. Just before she walked down the aisle, when Grace turned to her best friend and whispered, "What have I done?" The honeymoon lasted 2 weeks. Then the reality began. The rules were simple and absolute. No acting, no Hollywood friends visiting without permission, no public appearances without Rainier's approval, no leaving Monaco without informing him first. "You're a princess now," Rainier explained. "That's a full-time job." Grace tried to argue. Once. "I could do one film. Hitchcock has a script." "No." "But Rainier," I said. "No, Grace. Your acting career is finished. You chose this life." She was pregnant with Caroline by then. There was no going back. The palace became her world. Beautiful, luxurious, suffocating. The years passed like water through her fingers. Caroline born in 1957, Albert in 1958, Stephanie in 1965. 3 perfect children for the perfect princess. Grace played her role flawlessly. Charity galas, hospital openings, state functions. She was elegant, gracious, untouchable. The ice princess, now locked in an ice palace. But beneath the surface, Grace Kelly was drowning. She drank. Late at night, when Rainier was attending to palace business and the children were asleep, she would stand at her window, looking out at the Mediterranean, thinking about Hollywood, about freedom. In 1962, 6 years into her marriage, Alfred Hitchcock called. "Please, Grace," Hitchcock said, "I wrote Marnie for you. Nobody else can play it." Grace went to Rainier, carefully explained. One film, summer shooting. Rainier listened, then shook his head. "No." "But Hitch, I don't care about Hitchcock. You're the Princess of Monaco. That's your only role now." Grace left the room. She walked to her bathroom, locked the door, and wept for 20 minutes. When she emerged, her makeup was perfect, her face composed. She never asked to act again. The 1970s were harder. The children were rebellious teenagers. Grace watched them and felt something close to envy. She took lovers, rumoured ones, nothing confirmed. But there were whispers, men who offered her, briefly, the feeling of being wanted for herself. Rainier knew, or suspected, but he said nothing, as long as she was discreet. The marriage had become what it had always been, a contract. "Do you ever regret it?" her daughter Caroline asked one afternoon in 1973. Caroline was 16. They were in the palace gardens, Monaco, spread below them like a beautiful prison. "Every day, darling," Grace finally said. "Every single day." Caroline started crying. Grace held her. "But I love you, all of you. I don't regret you." "But you regret the choice." Grace didn't answer. She didn't need to. By 1982, Grace Kelly had been Princess of Monaco for 26 years. She was 52, still beautiful, but with wisdom in her eyes that came from years of quiet suffering. That summer, rumours began circulating. Grace was considering a return to acting. She'd been in secret discussions with producers. Rainier heard the rumours. The palace staff noticed he'd become more watchful. Grace's schedule was suddenly packed with obligations, every move monitored. The cage was tightening again. September 13th, 1982, Monday morning. Grace and Stephanie were at Rock Angel, the family's country home in the mountains. They needed to return to the palace. Grace insisted on driving. She'd done this route 1,000 times. Stephanie climbed into the passenger seat of the Rover 3500. Mother and daughter, alone together, for the last time. At 9:45 a.m., somewhere between two hairpin turns, Grace Kelly suffered a stroke. Her hands went slack on the wheel. "Mom?" Stephanie said. "Mom, what's wrong?" The car drifted. "Mom!" Grace's eyes were open but unseeing. Her foot slipped off the brake. Stephanie grabbed for the wheel, but it was too late. The Rover went over, tumbling down the mountainside, metal shrieking, glass shattering. When the car finally stopped 50 feet down the slope, Stephanie crawled out, bruised, terrified, but alive. Grace didn't move. The ambulance took 45 minutes to arrive. Massive head trauma, internal injuries. The stroke had been severe. Even in a hospital, doctors said later, they probably couldn't have saved her. But that didn't stop the questions. Why that road? There was a safer route. Why was she driving so fast? And why had Grace seemed so calm that morning? So distant? Like she was already somewhere else? Rainier arrived at the hospital an hour after the crash. He held Grace's hand as machines breathed for her. The doctors explained. Brain dead. No hope. On September 14th, 1982, Rainier made the decision. Grace Kelly died at 10:35 p.m. She was 52 years old. She'd been trying to escape for 26 years. The funeral was held on September 18th. 600 guests, including Hollywood royalty she hadn't seen in decades. Cary Grant, Frank Sinatra, James Stewart. Rainier wept at the altar. Real tears. He'd loved her, in his way, as much as a man who needed to own beautiful things could love. But love wasn't the same as freedom. Stephanie blamed herself for years. If I'd been driving, if I'd grabbed the wheel faster. But the truth was simpler and more terrible. Grace had had a stroke, a medical event. The car went over. These were facts. But the woman who'd been dying slowly for 26 years, trapped in a golden palace, suffocating under perfection, playing a role she never wanted, that woman had died long before the crash. The girl who'd won an Oscar at 25, who dared to love and challenge Hitchcock and demand to be more than a beautiful face. That Grace Kelly had died in April 1956, when she walked down the aisle. What died in September 1982 was just the body. Today, Princess Stephanie has spent her life running from the expectations her mother suffocated under. 3 marriages, tabloid scandals, anything but being the perfect princess. My mother gave up everything to be perfect, Stephanie said years later. I watched it kill her. So I decided I'd rather be imperfect and alive. Princess Caroline speaks of her mother with love and sadness. She was trapped. We all knew it, but nobody could save her, because the cage was gilded, and the world thought she was living a fairy tale. Prince Rainier never remarried. He kept Grace's rooms exactly as she'd left them. Some said love, others said guilt. Perhaps both. Alfred Hitchcock died in 1980, 2 years before Grace. Asked about his favorite actress, he said, Grace Kelly. She was perfect. But perfection is a prison. On the road above Monaco, where Grace's car went over, there's no marker. Just a hairpin turn that tour guides point to. This is where Princess Grace died. They don't say, this is where Grace Kelly finally escaped. They don't say, she'd been trying to leave for 26 years. They don't say, the fairy tale was a lie. One word, 3 letters, spoken into a telephone in December 1955. Yes. The simplest word in the English language. The one that cost Grace Kelly her entire life. That was Grace Kelly, the most beautiful woman in the world, who said yes to a prince and spent 26 years dying in a palace. They called it a fairy tale. She called it a cage. And in the end, the only way out was death.